My name is Frank Delgado. I'm 68 years old. I've got a bad knee, a quiet house, and a coffee mug that leaks from a crack I can't seem to find. I used to think those were the worst parts of getting old. But the worst part? It's being forgotten by the person you raised. Sit back and let me tell you how I got my revenge from my son. Before we go too far, feel free to subscribe and let me know where you're listening from. It means more than you think. I was a single father for 28 years. My wife passed when Andrew was barely 4. Brain aneurysm, no warning, just gone. From that moment on, every decision I made was about him, his school, his meals, his clothes, his future. My life became a schedule built around his needs. I wasn't rich, never could afford to be. I worked maintenance for the city for most of my adult life. Fixed broken water lines, patched up sidewalks, cleared snow when no one else wanted to. Not glamorous, but steady. My hands were always tired, but they were always busy. Andrew? He was smart. Book smart, street smart, all of it. He could talk his way out of anything. Got a full ride to college. Made friends with the right people. Business school, then law. When he graduated, I sat in the back row in a suit that didn't fit, next to people wearing watches that probably cost more than my car. Didn't matter. I was proud. He earned it. But success, it changes people, or maybe it reveals them. At first, it was small things. He started correcting the way I talked in front of his colleagues. Then he asked me not to come to a fundraiser because I wouldn't enjoy that kind of crowd. Then, one day, he called me and said we needed to set boundaries. Boundaries. That was the word he used, like I was some stray dog that kept wandering into his perfect yard. He told me he was getting married. She was beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. I never met her. He didn't invite me to the wedding. Didn't even call the day after, or the week after. Just vanished into his new, curated life. I told myself I was fine. That this was just part of letting go. But every time I looked at the empty chair across from mine at dinner, it stung. I had one friend left in town, Carl. He used to work with me. Lost his wife, too. We'd meet up once a week at the same diner, sit in the same booth, order the same coffee. Carl talked more than I did. I think he could sense the silence in me. One morning, after I picked at a stack of pancakes I didn't want, he slid a lottery ticket across the table. "Try your luck," he said with a smirk. "Who knows? Might win and buy yourself a reason to smile." I looked at it like it was a joke. Because that's what it felt like, a plastic-coated joke. The kind of thing you buy when you have hope or nothing left to lose. I had no hope. But I had nothing left to lose either. That night, I sat at the kitchen table. The TV was on, but I wasn't watching it. My hands rested on the ticket like it was some kind of relic. I thought about tearing it in half. Then I thought about Andrew. How he once told me that I embarrassed him. How he once asked me not to show up at his office again without calling first. How he didn't even ask if I had anyone to spend Christmas with. I picked up a pen and wrote something on the back of the ticket. "If I win, I'll disappear just like you did." Then I scratched the numbers. And stared. And stared. And stared. $78 million. At first I thought I'd read it wrong. I double-checked. Triple-checked. Went online. Called the number. It was real. $78 million. A number so big it didn't feel like it belonged in my life. A number that didn't make me laugh. It didn't make me cry either. It made me quiet. I didn't call Carl. I didn't tell anyone. I just sat there, in that quiet house, and looked around. Every photo on the wall was crooked. Every chair creaked. Every fork was mismatched. I built that house with my bare hands. Worked extra shifts to buy it. Paid off the mortgage in full by my 50th birthday. And now? Now it felt like a museum of someone who had been forgotten. I got up and made a pot of coffee. Same leaking mug. Same chipped handle. But this time I didn't sit down. I opened the drawer and took out a yellow notepad. I made a list. It started with, sell house, close all accounts, get a passport. Then I wrote something I hadn't written in years. Find peace. I didn't mean forgiveness. I didn't mean healing. I meant distance. The kind of peace that comes when no one can reach you. The kind Andrew had chased his whole life by pushing people like me away. 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of an airport terminal, watching people move like ants around me. My hands were still calloused, still rough from decades of labor, but in my pocket was a wallet with more power than I'd ever imagined having. I didn't buy first class, didn't book the fanciest hotel, didn't rent a private jet. I just boarded a plane, window seat, head down, and I left. Left the house, left the silence, left the person I used to be, and just like that, I became invisible. By the time I got home, the air felt heavier somehow. I microwaved the stew from 2 nights ago, chewed without tasting it, and stared at the empty chair across from me. I missed hearing the hum of Andrew's voice. Even if it was just him talking about deadlines, campaign trails, or his favorite podcasts, it had filled the silence. Now, there was only the quiet and the click of my spoon against the ceramic bowl. Later that night, I pulled out the old cardboard box where I kept all the small tokens from raising Andrew. His first drawing, just a crayon mess, but he'd proudly said it was Dad and me fixing the sink. His acceptance letter to college. A birthday card he wrote when he was 8 that read, "You're my superhero." That one hurt the most. I sat there in my worn recliner with the card in my lap and my head in my hands. I didn't cry, but something in me cracked open. Something slow and bitter that I hadn't felt since the day Mary left. Maybe I was getting too old for this kind of loneliness. A week later, I walked to the post office. The air was damp, and the usual morning crowd was thinner than usual. I stood in line behind a woman mailing a box of knitted scarves and a teenager complaining loudly on his phone. When I got to the front, the clerk, Jenny, smiled politely and asked if I wanted my usual stamps. "Sure," I said, but my voice sounded far away. As she rang me up, my eyes drifted to the lottery display behind the counter. It was something I'd never paid attention to. Bright colors, big numbers, empty promises. But today, I don't know. I guess it was the emptiness I felt, or maybe the urge to feel something, anything. "Add one of those too," I said, nodding at the green ticket with the week's jackpot printed in bold. Jenny raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think you were the lottery type, Frank." "I'm not," I said, "but who knows, maybe the universe owes me one." I scratched the ticket at the bus stop. The first number matched, then the second, then the third. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. $78 million. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, thinking it must be a mistake. People like me didn't win things like this. Not on a whim. Not with the last $5 in their wallet. I didn't go home right away. I walked the long way around the park, holding that ticket like it was a relic. My brain couldn't keep up. I should have been screaming or dancing or calling someone. But there was no one to call. The one person I wanted to share it with had made it clear I didn't belong in his world anymore. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen in my hand and a single piece of paper in front of me. I didn't write a letter. I didn't plan anything big. I just wrote a note across the top. If I disappear, know that I finally got tired of being forgotten. Then I folded the ticket inside, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in the box with all Andrew's keepsakes. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase and left the house before sunrise. I didn't leave a forwarding address. First stop was Venice. I stayed in a modest guest house with creaky floors and ivy-covered walls. Every morning, I took my espresso by the canal, watching gondolas glide past like pieces of a slower world. Tourists swarmed the city in loud waves, but I found silence in the early mornings before the crowds woke. I thought of Andrew then, how he used to dream of visiting Italy. He had a book on Renaissance architecture when he was 10. Said he'd study abroad in college. Never did. I bought a postcard with a watercolor of the Grand Canal and wrote in small, neat letters, "You always wanted to see this. The bridge looks smaller in person. Hope you're well." No return address, just his name. A week later, I was in Kyoto. The temples felt like something from another life. I knelt at one of them, not out of faith, but respect, and let the weight of time sit on my shoulders. Another postcard. "Cherry blossoms are in bloom. You used to say pink was the color of calm. Turns out you were right." Then Cape Town, where I stood at the edge of the cliffs, feeling the wind slice through my jacket. Then Reykjavik, with its blue lagoons and sky that never seemed to settle on one color. Each city gave me something. Not healing exactly, but distance. Enough space to breathe without the echo of a slammed door. In each city I sent a postcard to Andrew. Always polite, always distant. No explanations. No clues. Just fragments of the life he once claimed I didn't fit into. I knew what I was doing. I knew these little messages would burrow somewhere deep under his skin. He may have erased me from his life, but I would linger, like a shadow on his shoulder. Back home, I heard through an old neighbor that Andrew was doing well, still rising in his career, married but not exactly happily. He'd moved into a bigger house, one that looked eerily like the one I built from the ground up with my own hands. Same porch style, same wood beams. I wondered if he told people his father used to sand floors in boots with holes in them. Probably not. I kept traveling, kept sending postcards. From Morocco, your mother loved dates, every corner here sells them. From Berlin, remember when you tried learning German? Still can't pronounce Eichhornchen, neither can I. And so it went, months blurred into seasons. I changed phone numbers, closed old accounts, bought books in languages I didn't understand and read them anyway. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't ready to be found either. One night in Oslo, I received an email from a name I hadn't seen in years. Andrew. It wasn't long, just a subject line and one sentence in the body. Subject, are you okay? Message, I don't know where you are, but I hope you're safe. I stared at the screen for a while. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I didn't press it. Not yet. Not when the wound was still warm under the skin. Instead, I packed my bag the next morning and left for Barcelona. Postcard from the Sagrada Familia. Still under construction, like some people. No name, just the card. From a small coastal village in Portugal, I sent another. You would have liked the grilled sardines. They taste like the sea in memory. I pictured him reading each one. I imagined him confused, maybe annoyed, maybe even hurt. Good. Let him feel a fraction of what he made me carry. Back when he told me not to show up to his campaign launch. Back when he said, "It's not personal, Dad. It's about the optics." He'd used that word optics as if I was a smudge on glass. I could have lashed out. Could have raised my voice. But I didn't. Silence is a blade if you know how to hold it. And I was learning. It wasn't until I returned to the States, briefly and without announcement, that I saw the first crack in Andrew's perfect image. A news clip online. A failed business merger. Accusations of mismanagement. His name wasn't dragged through the mud exactly, but it was scuffed. And in his world, a scuff could cost everything. Then came the gossip. A friend from back home mentioned in passing that Andrew's wife had moved out. Stress got to her, I guess, she said. The house is too big anyway. I didn't ask questions, didn't want to seem interested. But I watched from the edges, because something was shifting. And I wasn't done yet. By the time I reached Kyoto, the leaves had started to fall. The temples were quiet. The streets carried a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years, though peace was a strange word for what stirred inside me. Each morning I walked the same path to the tea garden. I'd sit alone at the back, beneath a maple tree whose limbs were turning crimson. It was there that I wrote him another card. You used to like routine. Still do, I bet. Mine is simpler now. Tea, walk, breathe. Still no name. Still no return address. Just enough for him to feel the distance I had once felt when he stood in front of me and said, "I think we need space." That space had become a canyon, and I had learned to live on the other side of it. In Morocco, I bought spices I couldn't name. In Greece, I danced with strangers who didn't ask who I was. In Brazil, I watched fireworks alone on a rooftop, thinking about how loud celebration can feel when there's no one to share it with. But I didn't return home. Not even for the holidays. Especially not for the holidays. Because silence is louder when people expect your voice. One afternoon, I received a text. It was from an unknown number. But I knew exactly who it was. "Dad, I don't know if this is still you. Just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I stared at the screen. Not because I didn't expect it, but because, somehow, I did. Guilt has its own timing. I didn't reply. Instead, I mailed a card from a cafe in Istanbul. "You were always good with words. Let's see what you do without mine." A few months later, I flew to New Zealand. Hiked the fjords. Slept in a camper van. Talked to no one for 3 days straight. That's when I got the email. From a mutual friend. "Hey Frank, thought you should know, Andrew's had a rough go. Lost a big client, might lose the house. He won't say it, but I think he could use someone right now." I didn't reply to that either. But I saved the message. Read it again later. Then again, a few days after that. The words didn't make me happy. But they settled into something else. Not pity. Not satisfaction. Just balance. The world was tilting back into place. The world was tilting back into place. In Kyoto, I watched the cherry blossoms fall like paper secrets from the trees. In Morocco, I learned to sit still in a market full of shouting. In Patagonia, I stood so close to the edge of a glacier I could hear it breathe. Each place gave me something I didn't know I'd lost. Time, quiet, wonder. But none of them made me forget. Every few weeks I sent Andrew another card. One from Iceland. "Your mother and I once talked about seeing the Northern Lights. I came alone." One from South Korea. "There's a tea here that helps with sleep. You always had trouble shutting your mind off." One from Egypt. "People come here looking for answers in the past, but all I see is dust that once mattered. I never signed them. He'd know. And I imagined he was collecting them, or burning them, or ignoring them completely. Didn't matter. The message was in the silence between the lines." Back in the States, I kept my distance. I rented a cabin far from any town, no internet, spotty phone reception. Some days, I built furniture, like I used to. Other days, I just watched the woods. I didn't need noise. I needed stillness. To hear my own thoughts without interruption. One afternoon, I drove into town for groceries. At the register, I caught a glimpse of a newspaper headline beside the gum. "Councilman Andrew Delgado announces re-election bid." There was a photo. Him in a sharp suit, smiling like nothing had ever hurt him. I took a breath. He was still chasing legacy. Still polishing the surface while the inside rotted. He looked like a man winning. But I'd learned that appearances were just costumes we wore to avoid mirrors. I didn't send a postcard that month. Instead, I wrote a letter and never mailed it. It sat folded in my jacket pocket for weeks until the creases began to fade. "I don't hate you." That would mean I still expect something. "I just hope the silence teaches you something words never could." I burned it on a Tuesday. Watched the smoke rise like something being released. Winter came, the kind that settles into your bones before it touches your skin. I spent most days chopping wood, keeping my hands busy while my mind wandered. The postcards stopped, not because I had run out of places, but because I had run out of things to say without repeating myself. I didn't want pity. Not his, not mine. The silence between us had grown so wide, it became its own language. Sometimes I imagined him walking into his office, pulling open a drawer filled with my postcards, and wondering what he missed. Other times I imagined he'd thrown them out the second they arrived. Truth is, either version was fine with me. Both meant he saw them. I began volunteering at a local workshop. They fixed broken chairs, shelves, old cabinets people didn't want to throw away. There was something peaceful about it. Quiet work, honest work. No one asked who I was. No one cared. Every now and then, someone would ask about a scar on my hand, or the way I knew which joint would give out first. I'd shrug and say, "Spent a lifetime fixing things that were easier to replace." They always thought I meant furniture. One night, I stayed late to finish gluing a cracked rocking chair. I turned off the lights, locked up, and walked into the cold air. Across the street, a car was idling. New, expensive, out of place in this town. The driver wasn't visible, but I felt eyes on me. I waited a moment, then kept walking. A minute later, the engine cut and the car drove away slowly. Coincidence, maybe, or maybe not. The next morning, I got a call from an old neighbor in the city. She'd kept in touch over the years, mostly holiday cards and short updates. "I saw Andrew on TV," she said. "He looks thinner." I didn't reply. She hesitated. "You should call him." I thanked her, hung up, and didn't. Some weeks later, I passed by a bookstore and saw a magazine cover. "Where is Frank Delgado?" Subheadline: The Disappearance of a Councilman's Father. My photo, an old one, was on the corner of the page. I picked up the magazine, flipped through. Half of it was speculation. The rest was recycled interviews from years ago. A quote from Andrew. He made his own choices. We're very different people. That part was true. Still no sign of decline. Still no mention of money troubles or scandals or desperation. He was still standing tall, which meant I had more time. Because true silence isn't just about absence. It's about timing. And revenge, if it's to be remembered, must always arrive when the other person thinks they're safe. The magazine sat untouched on my kitchen table for 3 days. I didn't need to read it again. I already knew what it said, and more importantly, what it didn't. He wasn't looking for me. He was shaping a version of me for the world. One that made him look clean, respectable, polished. It was smart. Cruel, but smart. I let it sit there until the corner curled, then threw it into the fire one night, with the rest of the week's paper. The flame caught quickly, then went out just as fast. Some lies burn better than others. At the workshop, I started building a piece of furniture that had no customer. A simple thing, really. A narrow writing desk with a fold-down panel. No one asked who it was for. Maybe they thought it was for me. It wasn't. It was for the man I used to be, the one who sat at the kitchen table every night helping his son with schoolwork, figuring out how to stretch a paycheck across meals and heating bills. I carved a single line beneath the drawer. Some debts are repaid in silence. Then I sanded it smooth. Spring came early that year. Snow melted before the trees could catch up, leaving a wet, uncertain kind of season in its place. I planted nothing. There was no need. Instead, I started walking more. Just long enough to pass by parks where fathers pushed swings and laughed without knowing who was watching. I didn't envy them, but I watched. Not the men, but the kids. Their joy, their blind trust that someone would always be behind them, ready to catch if they slipped. That trust, that's what I used to have with Andrew. He didn't know how much of it was left until he kicked it away. Around this time, I changed banks. Not because I had to, but because I didn't want old ties. The woman at the counter looked at my ID, then looked at me. "You don't look like a Frank," she said playfully. I smiled. Neither do I, some days. She handed me the papers, then added, "Anything else I can help with?" I paused. "Yes, I'd like to set up a trust fund." "For someone in particular?" I gave her the name of a foundation, one that helped tradesmen rebuild their lives after layoffs or accidents. No mention of Andrew. That part of the story still had chapters left. But my revenge? It would help strangers before it ever helped blood. I went home, pulled out one of the postcards I never sent, and wrote just 4 words. "I'm still watching, son." Then I tucked it away in the desk. Not mailed, not stamped, just waiting. Because the next chapter wasn't mine to start. But I'd be ready when it came. I started keeping a map on my wall. Not the kind with roots or pins, but one I marked silently, town by town, country by country. It wasn't about places. It was about distance. The farther I got from home, the clearer the silence sounded. Sometimes I'd sit by the window of a hotel in Prague or Florence or Marrakesh, just watching people pass by with their arms full of bread and flowers and small joys. And I'd think, this could have been us. But then I'd remember, he didn't want us. He wanted him. So I wrote another card. Didn't send it, just folded it neatly and slid it into the desk drawer. The farther I go, the louder I remember. I never traveled with company. Not because I disliked people, but because my silence was mine, and no one else could carry it for me. Every morning felt like a fresh page. One where no one had written embarrassment or in the way at the top. Once, in a small mountain village, a boy no older than 7 helped me carry a walking stick up a hill. When I thanked him, he shrugged. "My father says people like you are closer to the stars." I almost laughed. Closer to the stars. That's rich, coming from a man whose son won't even let him see the light in his life. I handed the boy a coin and kept climbing. He waved. I didn't turn around. Months passed, like postcards. Each one stamped with places I'd never dreamed I'd see. I stopped collecting souvenirs. Everything I needed was in that drawer now. Each card a message, each message a weight. The kind of weight that grows lighter the longer you carry it, until the day it lands on someone else's chest. One night in Kyoto, I watched a candle burn beside a temple bell. The wax melted in slow folds, like memory. I thought of his childhood blanket, the one with tiny stars sewn into the edge, the one he swore he'd keep forever. I wondered where it went. Maybe a landfill, maybe a donation bin. Or maybe it was still in a closet, buried under nicer, newer things. That's what he did with me, after all. I didn't curse him. Not out loud. Not even in the letters I never sent. I simply remembered. Every meal I skipped so he could eat. Every sleepless night I spent by his side when he had a fever. Every second job I took to afford the school he brags about now without ever mentioning who made it possible. And I carved those memories into wood, into ink, into silence. Because words fade. But marks stay. The days blurred into one another. There were moments when I forgot what day it was, or even what country. But I never forgot his birthday. Every year I bought a gift. Something small. Something meaningful. A leather-bound notebook in Florence. A handmade compass in Istanbul. A pen carved from olive wood in Athens. I never sent them. I just wrapped each one, labeled them with the year, and tucked them into a drawer beside the postcards. Sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, I'd open it. Not to look at the gifts, but to count how many times I'd remembered a boy who had forgotten me. One evening in Portugal, I found myself at a small restaurant by the coast. A woman with silver hair and tired eyes sat across from me, separated by an empty table. She kept glancing at the sea. Eventually, she looked over and asked, "You waiting on someone?" "No," I said, just letting the silence catch up. She nodded. "Takes less time the older you get." We didn't talk after that. But when she left, she touched my shoulder. "You've got the look of someone who gave too much to someone who wanted too little." I didn't respond. But I wrote it down that night. In Barcelona, I met a stray cat that reminded me of the one Andrew used to feed as a boy. He'd named it Captain. Said it had a brave heart and sad eyes. It came around every afternoon for nearly a year. Then one day, it just stopped. Andrew cried for 2 days. Then he stopped too. That was the first time I saw how easily he could close a door. Maybe that's when I should have prepared myself. Maybe that was the warning I didn't listen to. The postcards continued, every 2 months like clockwork. They weren't angry. They weren't desperate. They were honest. I saw a father and son laughing on a bench today. For a second I thought it was us. Then I remembered, we don't do that anymore. Today I visited a museum full of broken statues. It reminded me of promises. I heard a song you used to hum. The tune stayed, you didn't. I never signed them with Dad. Just F. Because that's all I was allowed to be now. A letter in the alphabet of his new life. It was in Seoul where I finally allowed myself to cry. Not the kind of crying that comes with noise. The kind that shakes your chest without a sound. The kind you only earn after holding it in for too long. I'd visited a small park. There was a boy flying a red kite, and his father ran behind him, laughing. At one point, the boy tripped, and the man lifted him up without hesitation. It was so natural, so seamless. Like the world knew exactly how to hold him. I had done that, I had been that. And now I was something else. Someone else. Someone watching from a distance. I rented a place in Kyoto during the cherry blossom season. People came from all over the world to see them. Couples, families, friends, all standing under the falling pink petals with phones in their hands and joy on their faces. I stood there alone, watching the petals fall. They looked like pieces of something soft breaking apart, like memories you couldn't hold on to. There was a small boy sitting on a bench beside his grandfather. The man held out a rice cracker to feed the birds. The boy reached up, smiled, and said, "Thank you, Grandpa." I turned away before the tears came. In Oslo, I stayed near a lake. The air was cold but clean, the silence thick but kind. Each morning I walked to the edge of the water and watched it mirror the sky. I thought of Andrew, how he used to sit beside me as a child, skipping stones across the river near our old house. He was never good at it. The stones would plop after 1 or 2 skips. But he didn't care. He just laughed and said, "That one danced." I remember thinking, maybe he sees things I don't. Maybe he finds joy in the fall, not just the flight. I kept traveling. Warsaw, Cape Town, Lima. The more stamps in my passport, the less weight I seemed to carry. But that was a lie, too. I didn't feel lighter. I just got better at hiding the heaviness. My world had become postcards, receipts, and airport gates. I didn't belong anywhere. But I wasn't running either. I was waiting. For something to shift. For the ache to settle into something useful. One night in Buenos Aires, I dreamt of Andrew. He was sitting on our old porch, knees pulled up, arms resting on them like he used to when he was thinking hard. I walked up behind him. He didn't turn around. He just said, "Why didn't you come find me?" And I woke up crying. The next postcard I sent didn't mention a location. I simply wrote, "Sometimes the silence isn't punishment, it's preservation." In Turkey, I stayed in a small town along the coast. A place where time seemed to slow down. Or maybe I just noticed it more there. The sound of the waves became my companion. Predictable, gentle, constant. Unlike people. There was a tiny workshop near the harbor. The man inside built model ships out of driftwood and old wires. He didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak Turkish. But we nodded at each other every morning. He handed me coffee once, no words, just a slight smile and the warmth of the cup in my hand. That was the most human connection I'd had in weeks. And somehow, it was enough. I stopped carrying my phone. Not because I didn't want to be found, but because I didn't want to give myself the option of reaching out. I knew if I heard his voice, even just once, I might forget what I was trying to become. Not a bitter man, not a vengeful man, just someone who no longer begged for space in someone else's life. I found myself in Montreal for the fall. The leaves were turning, the city glowing with amber and crimson light. I walked through a park where musicians played violin and children chased pigeons. A young man sat on a bench, talking to his mother on speakerphone. "I'm trying, okay?" he said. "I just don't know what I'm doing anymore." The call ended. He lowered his head into his hands, and I sat 2 benches away, pretending not to watch, pretending not to understand. But I did, because for years that was me, trying, failing, loving, hurting, and saying nothing about any of it. In Lisbon, a cat followed me home. She was gray and quiet, with one torn ear and eyes like rain clouds. I named her Mina. She never made a sound, just curled up on the chair across from me every night and blinked slowly, like she understood. When I left the door open. And she stayed, just long enough to remind me that some goodbyes don't hurt. They just happen. I wrote Andrew from Morocco. This city smells like cumin and old stone. People say hello with their eyes here. I remember when you used to do that. Just a glance, and I'd know you were okay. No signature. In Prague, I walked into a bookstore just before closing. Dust floated in the last beam of sunlight cutting through the window. The man behind the counter looked up and said, "You're not looking for a book. You're looking for a memory." He was right. I left without buying anything, but the smell of old paper clung to me for days. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, not because I missed him, but because I remembered too clearly the feeling of being unwanted. The silence after giving everything you had. The door that never opened again. I once dreamed I was knocking on a door with no handle. Inside, I could hear laughter, Andrew's voice, faint but warm. I kept knocking, kept begging, but no one answered, not even the silence. In Kyoto, I met a man who had lost his son. "Cancer," he said. He held up 2 fingers to show the boy was just that old. We sat in a temple garden for hours. Neither of us spoke. Pain recognizes pain, even across language. When we parted, he handed me a folded paper crane. "Family is wind," he said in broken English. "Sometimes gone. Sometimes come back." I carried that crane in my coat pocket for months. Every few weeks, I sent another postcard. They were short now, tighter, sharper. "Do you still drink that awful vanilla coffee? You hated it as a kid, but now it smells like you. The stars here don't move. Or maybe I've just been standing still too long. Your mother would have loved this place." I stood by the water and thought of the time you dropped your shoe off the pier. You cried until I dove in after it. I never told you I was scared of the water. I didn't ask how he was. I didn't say I missed him. Because this wasn't about guilt. It was about echo. Letting him feel, over time, what he had chosen to forget. Letting absence ring louder than any voice. In Buenos Aires, I took a tango lesson. The instructor was younger than Andrew. She called me Señor Madera, Mr. Wood, because I moved stiff as a board. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Not because I was happy, but because for a few minutes I forgot what sadness tasted like. Then came the news I didn't expect. An old friend from my hometown emailed me. Subject, "You seen this?" Attached was a local newspaper headline: Councilman Andrew Delgado under fire amid financial misconduct rumors. I didn't open the article. Didn't need to. I closed the laptop, walked outside, and stood under the pouring rain without an umbrella. Sometimes justice doesn't need a witness. In Marrakesh, I wandered through the souks with no destination. The air was thick with spice and sound. Someone offered me tea. I sat and drank without asking the price. A child chased a paper bag down the alley. It caught the wind and floated up into the orange sky. I don't know why I cried watching it. Maybe because it looked so free. Maybe because I didn't. There was a day in Lisbon when I spent an entire morning carving. I found a quiet spot near the cliffs and whittled a small horse from olive wood. It wasn't perfect. The legs were uneven, the eyes too far apart, but it reminded me of the one I carved for Andrew when he was 6. He broke it the same day. I glued it back together that night. He never knew. I left the new one in a park, under a bench. Some kid will find it. Some kid will smile. That's enough. Another postcard. This one from Bali. They light lanterns at dusk here. I wrote your name on one, just once, and let it go. It flew too high for me to follow. One morning in Istanbul, I saw an older man feeding stray cats. He whistled, and they came running from all directions. He turned to me and said, "You feed the ones who remember you. The rest, they just watch." I fed them too. Not because they remembered me, but because I wanted to remember myself. Still no calls, no letters, only silence, which was fine, because silence had become my language. And I was fluent now. I didn't buy anything extravagant. No mansions, no watches, no parades of luxury. Instead, I bought time. Time to sit, to breathe, to feel. I stayed in modest places, cooked when I could, helped strangers lift bags, repaired a squeaky door for an old couple in Naples. They called me Angelo Silenzioso, the quiet angel. One night, in an old hotel in Salzburg, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I wasn't thinking of revenge. Not really. I was thinking of gravity. Of how things fall apart, not suddenly, but slowly. Like dust collecting on a shelf no one touches anymore. Then came a postcard I didn't write. A return address I didn't recognize. It wasn't from Andrew. It was from someone with his last name. His wife. "Mr. Delgado, I don't know what happened between you two, but he's not well. He won't admit it, but he talks to himself now. Sits up at night staring at old photos. He keeps every card you sent in a box with your name on it. I just thought maybe you should know." I folded the letter carefully, placed it inside my journal. Didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. Too much. In Kyoto, I walked through a bamboo forest just before sunrise. The stalks whispered in the wind like voices too soft to understand. I stood still, listening. A memory came. Not loud, just sudden. Andrew at 12, hiding under the porch during a thunderstorm. He wasn't scared of the lightning. He was hiding from me. We had fought that day. I don't remember what about. But I remember finding him there, curled up like something small and breakable. I remember sitting beside him without saying a word. And I remember him leaning into me like he'd forgotten he was angry. We didn't speak. We just listened to the storm together. That night, in a quiet ryokan, I lit a single candle and stared at it. It reminded me of a truth I hated. Sometimes, even love flickers. Another card. This one from Patagonia. I thought I came here for the view. But really I came here to remember what it feels like to stand at the edge and not jump. In an alley in Prague, I saw a man playing a violin with only 2 strings. He looked broken. But he played like it didn't matter. Maybe it didn't. Maybe that's what music is, what love is. Playing with what you have left, even when most of it's gone. That evening, I wrote a short note and folded it into a paper crane. I placed it on a cafe table and walked away. To the one who finds this, you are not alone. The next card I sent Andrew was from Vienna. It had a photograph of a statue, a father holding his son high above the crowd. I didn't sign it, but I knew he'd know. I didn't need him to reply. I just needed him to feel something. Anything. In Seville, I met a woman who spoke no English. She handed me a slice of bread with olive oil and said, "Viejo alma, dulce corazón." Old soul, sweetheart. I didn't correct her. Not because she was wrong, but because it was the first kind thing anyone had said to me in months. Back in the States, I wandered. Not home. Never home. I passed through towns where nobody knew my name, and I liked it that way. I stayed in a small town in Oregon for a week, fixing things at a local church. Loose pews, flickering lights. They paid me in coffee and conversation. It felt like something close to grace. I hadn't heard from Andrew in over a year, but every time I mailed a card, I pictured him reading it. Not with anger. Not even with guilt. Just quietly. Maybe with the same ache I felt. Maybe with none at all. I dreamed about the house. Not the walls or the roof, but the sounds. Andrew running down the hallway in socks. The coffee pot bubbling. The creak of the back door at sunrise. I woke up missing a version of us that might never have existed. If you think the story has settled into calm waters, it hasn't. You're just in the eye of the storm. I landed back in the States without announcing it to anyone. No welcome party, no reporters, no clue to Andrew. I just wanted to see, not him, his world, quietly. I started by walking past his office building, a massive glass structure with banners still featuring his smiling face. Integrity, vision, leadership. His campaign had ended, but the signs remained. I stood across the street and watched. He didn't come out. I moved to places he used to go, the park where he jogged, the coffee shop he once loved, even the restaurant where we had our last public dinner 10 years ago. He never showed, but I always left a generous tip, out of habit. When I returned to my hotel, I opened my small journal and wrote 3 words. Still hiding well. He hadn't changed his number, but I didn't call. I still had my rules. Instead, I mailed another postcard. Back home now. The coffee isn't as rich here, but the silence still tastes like you. I didn't sign it. Over the next few weeks, I started getting glimpses of his life in ways I hadn't planned. An article in the newspaper, Andrew Delgado's Tech Fund Under Review. The piece was vague but hinted at irregularities and unusual investor withdrawals. I didn't react. A few days later, another headline, Delgado denies conflict of interest allegations. This time, the photograph they used wasn't the campaign smile, it was a man cornered. Still, I didn't react. I underlined a sentence in the article, sources say the board is losing confidence. I mailed another card. This city's colder than I remember. Funny how even the sun looks tired. I rented a car and parked near his house. I didn't go in, I just watched from the distance. The lawn wasn't as trimmed, the lights were dimmer, no signs of parties, no laughter echoing through the big windows anymore. His wife, Claire, came out once. She looked thinner, distracted. She got in a car and drove away without checking the mailbox. That evening I walked by and quietly slid a note in. I was here, you weren't. No name, no return address. I didn't expect a reaction. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing this for me. The next day, I found a photo someone had posted on social media. Andrew arguing with someone in a restaurant lobby. His tie was loose, his eyes wild. The caption read, Delgado's fall? I saved it but didn't look at it again. Instead, I bought a house. Not just any house. But not that house. Not yet. This one was far away. A quiet place on a hill. I filled it with silence, art, and time. I hired no staff. I didn't need noise. In the evenings, I sat by the window and reread the postcards I had sent him. They weren't for him. They were reminders, for me, of where I had gone, of who I had become. Weeks passed. Winter came early that year. One morning I was sipping lukewarm tea by the window when I saw a familiar envelope slide through the door. No name on the front. Just a return address I didn't recognize. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, short, typed, no signature. If you're still watching, I know I deserve it. I don't expect anything, but I think about that porch more than you know. I stared at the words. My hands didn't shake, but my heart did, just once. He had finally cracked, a chisel line in the marble. I didn't reply, but I walked outside, took a picture of the porch steps he mentioned, printed it, and mailed it back. Nothing else, just that photo. Let him sit with it. A month later, I heard from an old friend who still worked in local real estate. "Did you hear about Andrew?" he asked over the phone. I didn't answer. "He's selling, quietly. Rumor is he's broke." I said nothing, just let the silence fill the space. "They're doing a sealed auction. That house of his, your old place, it's going up." A pause. "You should go see it one last time." I didn't go. Not right away. Instead, I waited. 3 weeks. I wanted it to breathe. 3 weeks. I wanted it to breathe, to feel real, to let the dust settle before I stirred it again. Then, one overcast Thursday afternoon, I parked across the street from the house. My house. Or at least, it used to be. I watched from inside the car, windows fogged at the edges. The front yard had overgrown slightly. Nothing wild, just enough to suggest no one had lived there in a while. The porch light was off, the mailbox empty, the curtains were drawn. It looked paused, like it was waiting for something, or someone. I didn't get out of the car, not that day, but I kept coming back. Over the next week, I parked in different spots, down the block, behind the market, at the end of the cul-de-sac, each time finding some excuse not to walk up to the door. Maybe I thought if I waited long enough the house would speak first, give me a sign. It never did. I stayed in town longer than I meant to. Rented a room at a small motel just off the highway. Nothing fancy. Just a place with a window that faced west, so I could watch the sun dip below the rooftops every evening. One of those rooftops used to be mine. Each day, I found a different reason to linger. The weather. The news. A call I forgot to make. Excuses, really. I bought a new set of clothes. Less worn, more presentable. I trimmed my beard, got a haircut, even polished my old boots. I didn't know who I was preparing to see. Maybe just myself, reflected in that front window. The for sale sign was gone now. The lawn was still patchy, and the paint still peeled from the corners of the window frames, but the house stood quiet, still, as if waiting for someone who never came home. I imagined Andrew in another part of the city, sorting through boxes, forwarding mail, canceling utilities tied to the old address. Maybe he hated this part the most, closing the chapter he never thought he'd have to reopen. I thought about Amelia, too. How she'd once chased fireflies in that same yard. How her laughter bounced between the walls I built with my own hands. Sometimes I'd see shadows move behind the curtains. A silhouette near the hallway light. But I never got close enough to make out a face. And then one evening, it happened. The porch light flicked on, not automatically, like with a timer, but deliberate. Someone was home. I stayed in my car, parked 2 houses down, engine off. Watched as a figure stepped out onto the porch. Andrew. Same stiff posture, same clenched jaw. He lit a cigarette, took 2 drags, then crushed it out on the concrete railing like he didn't even want to finish it. His hand lingered there, resting on the edge. Still, like he was holding onto something invisible. A few minutes passed. Then he sat on the top step, hunched forward, elbows on knees, staring at the street like he was expecting someone to pull up. But no one came. Not for him. Not anymore. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix either. The kind that settles into your bones when your pride costs more than you expected to pay. He stayed like that for a long time. Then, just before going inside, he did something I wasn't ready for. He looked up, not toward me, but toward the sky, and whispered something I couldn't hear. A prayer? A name? A regret? Didn't matter. I didn't need to hear it to know what it meant. He stood up slowly, his joints stiff like they hadn't bent in days, walked back to the door. Paused with his hand on the knob, looked back once, just for a second. Then he went inside. The porch light stayed on. I waited until the house went dark. Then I drove away. Not home, nowhere really, just drove. Around old streets with names I still remembered, past the hardware store where I used to buy tools, the diner where we used to get pancakes on Saturdays, the little park where I once taught him to ride a bike. Everything felt smaller now. Or maybe I just wasn't looking at it with the same eyes. I pulled over by the lake, rolled down the window, let the cold air sting my skin. And for the first time in years I cried. Not out of anger. Not even sadness. It was something else. Something quieter. Something that had waited long enough. The next morning I woke before the sun, got dressed. Put on the coat I used to wear when I picked him up from school, the same one with the little tear on the inside pocket I never bothered to fix. And in that pocket I slipped the key. Not a new one. The old one, from before everything changed. I got in the car, drove without music, without the radio, just the sound of the tires humming against the road. The neighborhood was still asleep when I arrived. But I didn't park down the block this time. I pulled right into the driveway. The engine stopped. The silence felt loud. I stepped out, walked up to the door. And before I could knock, before I could even lift my hand, he opened it. Andrew. He stood there, still in pajamas, his eyes puffy like he hadn't slept. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not hiding the edge in his voice. I didn't answer. Just stared at him, at the house behind him, at the worn doorframe I once built with my own hands. He stepped forward, blocking the entry like it was his sacred ground. "It's sold," he said, "to some investor or something. I don't know. You shouldn't be here." Still, I said nothing. He exhaled through his nose, frustrated. "If you came to see it one last time, fine, but you can't come in." The words hung in the cold morning air. He started to close the door, slow but certain. That's when I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a single silver key, held it up, just long enough for him to see it clearly. His hand froze on the doorknob. "What is that?" I stepped forward, calm, controlled, quiet, inserted the key, turned it, and opened the door. He didn't move, not a step. Just watched, like his mind was trying to catch up to something his heart already understood. I crossed the threshold, slow, deliberate, like I was returning to something that had never stopped being mine. He finally spoke. "Wait, what the hell is going on?" I looked back once, meeting his eyes, then shut the door. Behind me. The sound echoed like a gavel. The place smelled different. His cologne lingered faintly in the hallway. A jacket thrown over the stair rail, half a cup of coffee cooling on the kitchen counter, all traces of a life not meant to last here. I didn't touch a thing. Just walked through the rooms, one by one, as if taking inventory of ghosts. The living room where I once read to him every night. The wall in the hallway still had the faint outline of the pencil marks tracking his height over the years. He must have painted over them, but not well. Upstairs, the room with the blue curtains, his childhood bedroom, was now an office. Cold, functional. But the nail I had hammered into the wall for his baseball cap, still there. He never pulled it out. Not really. Downstairs again. He was waiting just outside the door, still not inside, still not part of it. Why? He called through the wood. Why would you do this? My voice was calm, low, not cruel. Because some debts, I said, aren't paid in cash. A pause. Then I added, and some homes are taken back with a quiet key. He didn't respond. Didn't yell. Didn't beg. Didn't cry. He just stood there, exactly like I had, years ago. I walked to the front room and sat in the old chair he'd left behind, the one he always said was too stiff, too old, too much like me. I leaned back, and for the first time in years the house felt right again. Not warm, not cold, just mine. Some debts aren't paid with money, but some homes are reclaimed with a silent key. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of the story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.